I'm going to go visit the Great Barrier Reef, it's going to be the best time ever, and it was the best time ever. But it's during that experience that I found the conversations I was having on the reef were really difficult. Working in tourism, you meet thousands of strangers every single week, and definitely since 2016, 2017, when those back-to-back mass bleaching events occurs, everyone wants to know what's happening on the Great Barrier Reef. Is it dying? Is it not? What's the deal with climate change? Can we actually do anything? Like, people are feeling these things. Climate change is huge and overwhelming. And I found myself like 21 years old, and a bunch of people were like, what about climate change? And I was like, don't know. I don't know how to answer this question. Figure out what is our role in the system, and whether that's day-to-day actions within your home. And we all kind of know about some of those daily actions. I can guarantee all of you are doing some of them already. Most people are doing their best, but climate change is just this next level. And we've got corporations and governments who feel like they're sometimes actively working against us. It can feel really hard when you're doing your best. So we looked at how do we move people to more social action, being more comfortable talking about climate change. So now the programs that we run help people who work in tourism vessels talk about climate change, tourism operators. How we influence our social circles, and more importantly, how we influence political circles. People think of behaviour change as turning off the lights, but behaviour change can also be being more comfortable with contacting your local MPs. And so that's why I think science is important. My journey here has come from myself, being like, how do I grapple with this? I love the reef. It's the only place I feel like I'm at home. And yet, seeing it bleach every couple of years, well, lucky we got off the hook this year, but there's a big Super El Nino event coming next year, so we're never really truly off the hook. So how do we grapple with that? And I think social science can really help us figure that out.
Vanessa?
Hi everyone, it's lovely to meet you. My name is Vanessa. Piggybacking off what Yolanda said, I started my career in science and kind of like the hard science, that STEM angle. My story's a little bit different. I was born in the Dominican Republic. It's a tiny island in the Caribbean, pretty much a developing country, and about 80% of the population is dependent on coral reefs and fisheries and things like that. And as a little girl, my mom always used to take me out to these like very pristine environments. And throughout my lifetime, I started seeing the change, places where I would go as a little girl and see all these amazing corals and species and things like that. Over, 10, 15, 20 years, we went back and it was all, algae essentially. And so I started wondering, well, why? Why is this changing, and what role do I have to play as well in ensuring that that doesn't happen anymore? Unfortunately, in the Dominican Republic, there wasn't anything like environmental science, there wasn't a lot of awareness, and so using the power of the internet, I started, learning and educating myself about climate change, and that's how I ended up here in Australia. So I came to do my environmental science degree and really kind of learning the hard science of counting species and going out into the bush and the importance of koalas and things like that. And similar to you, Yolanda, I started realizing that that is important, but really environmental problems are social problems. Like, the reason why we are having these issues is because of the way we behave, whether individually or collectively. And so I made a shift, and I was like, okay, well, if we are looking at that behavior change, but more at a higher level of why are politicians making decisions that go against the kind of the nature of nature, essentially. And that's what I ended up doing my PhD on, just understanding how do we look at development in a different way, and that ties into tourism and it ties into sustainable development. And I think it's a kind of the way that I see the role of science and the importance of science is marrying science with heart, because someone mentioned earlier that, you can, I think it was you, Jason, that said, in the video, that you can give people the facts, but without that connection to that emotions and what you can do, then people won't be moved. So how do we bring those two things together? And I think that's why science is important, and using arts and other ways of communicating, like you said, Yolanda, is really that sweet spot.
Right. We might go back to Meta, please. Are important to you. Have you ever thought about that?
I didn't tick influencer. I did find it tricky though to choose between like a scientist or an artist, because I am a marine scientist, but I'm a filmmaker too, and an educator. So I sit in the realm of a variety of those fields where they all combine together, and I work with a lot of scientists to tell important stories about the research that's being done across particularly the Great Southern Reef, which for those of you that don't know, this is our temperate reefs across Australia, 8,000 kilometres of kelp forests. We got more seaweed species than anywhere else in the world. We've got so many species that are just only found across that temperate Australian coastline and nowhere else in the world. So really special for endemic species. And for quite some time now, I've been working on building this identity with a team of researchers and scientists and educators, and getting people, 70% of us in Australia live within 50 kilometres of the Great Southern Reef. And a lot of us interact with it on a daily basis, but still we don't see it in this country as a asset on a national level. And that raises issues. There's a massive funding disparity. And there's a lot of big scientific questions of things that we still don't know about the Great Southern Reef. So there's still a lot of work to be done. And one thing that's happened recently in South Australia, where I live, is this big harmful algal bloom that's been through, decimating reefs for over 12 months now. And what it's really exposed is big scientific gaps in our baseline understanding of what these reefs are like in the first place. And without that, we don't really have a very good idea about how things have changed. And that's a big problem, because we also then don't have good targets of when we do intervene and spend heaps of money on restoration, has it been successful? Well, we don't actually know if we don't have those good baselines in the first place. So there's a lot of big work that needs to be done on that scientific aspect, but also from the impact side of things and action, there's so much that can be done as well. And I guess one really strong example of where we've seen powerful action when communities have come together across the Great Southern Reef is the big Fight for the Bite campaign, which in the Great Australian Bight, there's been a lot of pressure over many, many years with big oil giants wanting to do offshore oil and gas drilling there. And it's just such a remote, wild place that, if there were to be an oil spill to happen there, it would just be catastrophic. And again, it goes back, we just wouldn't even know what we could lose. And in some of the surveys that had to be done for the environmental impact assessment of those in the Bight in deep sea, they're pulling up samples and they're bringing hundreds of things that are new to science, and they're only looking because, we might want to do some oil drilling here. And when modelling was released about the spilling, showing that it could smother, the bottom half of the country, that's when Aussies woke up and were like, hey, we do not want to take that risk. So people came together, and it just was a really strong example of how communities can come together to have some really strong impact, to rebuff massive oil giants with a lot of money, to say, we don't want you guys in our backyard, in the Great Southern Reef, in the Great Australian Bight, and successfully has pushed them out. So the next step is getting World Heritage protection for the Bight, and that's one of the campaigns that we're working on at the moment. And that's going to not only make it even harder for these oil giants in the future to do that sort of thing, but also attract more funding towards the research to better understand these systems in the first place, because there's huge gaps in our understanding. They're very remote, hard to get to reefs, it's very costly to get out there, but you just don't know what you're going to find unless you're looking.
I'm doing my best, I can't do more, what's the point? And so I just want you to know that, because it is really important we do what we can, and everyone does what they can, but impact isn't just everyone doing everything perfectly, it's everyone doing a little bit imperfectly. And there's research that shows that one of the top reasons why people don't engage with climate action is because they feel that they have to do everything perfectly. Like, we've shown people lists of, here's what you can do to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And if you give people a long list, they're really likely to pick nothing because they get overwhelmed and go, well, I can't do all of that. It's not feasible. And if you give people just a handful of things that are relevant to their lives, they're far more likely to pick one. For example, there's things we can think about for climate, and I'll get to Divers for Climate and Influence, but this is relevant. Impact's really important, like the top impactful actions as an individual, if we put policy advocacy aside, which is my favourite, but say things like going car free, things like going vegan, switching to solar. If you're a renter, very, very hard. If you live in regional Queensland, going out a car, you'll get told to get lost. Going vegan, probably the same. Telling people to go child-free, that's very personal, even though that's probably one of the highest things, the most impactful things you can do to reduce your carbon footprint. You can't go around saying, do not make young people. It's not just about impact, it's also about adoptability. If you've got something that is highly impactful but unlikely to be adopted, there's no point. So it's kind of finding that sweet spot for everyone's lives. Like, what are the impactful actions that work for you, and can you do them? If so, that's amazing. If everyone did that, we could really get somewhere. I think the stats for like vegetarianism and veganism or plant-based, if everyone switched like 2 to 3 meat-based meals a week, fantastic. You know, it's like those little things that work for you, because if it doesn't work for you, you're not going to do it. And it's not because we don't care, we hate the planet, we hate the reef, it's because life is hard, cost of living is high, and we have to acknowledge the reality of what it means to take climate action in day-to-day lives. And the ecological footprint and carbon footprint, while great, I think it's important to know that that term was invented by a fossil fuel company so that we would forget who's really doing the most, and that we sit there feeling really guilty. I had to break down a shopping centre once because I couldn't decide which product was better for the planet, and I was like, I guess I can't buy anything ever again. You know, if we're all doing that, we're not taking action, and so who wins in that case? So really, just on the back of that, I want everyone to really think about, you know, that it's really good to know your impact, but that's not the only number that matters. And I guess the work that we do at Divers for Climate, where we started based in Cairns because of the Great Barrier Reef, but now we've got a hub in Exmouth in WA, starting in Adelaide because we've been doing work with the algal bloom, and in Sydney because there's a great dive community in Sydney. And I guess the way that we spread impact is we know that people have power. You know, at the moment, people are feeling so overwhelmed by the state of the world, by the cost of things, like climate has fallen down the priority list, and people go, oh, everyone's just lazy, no one cares. Not true. It's really hard to engage in a complex problem like climate change. It's really hard to engage in political problems like climate change. It's uncomfortable, honestly. I hate it most days. And so for that reason, people don't. So with Divers for Climate, our job is, you know, divers are so passionate. I mean, all of you guys, I imagine a lot of people are divers and snorkelers. You know a lot more than most people. You've seen a lot more than most people. You care a lot more than most people. That's a very, very powerful community. If people like that could feel really, really confident and capable and comfortable to stand up to, whether it's media, politicians, anyone, a visitor, to talk about climate change without feeling like they're going to annoy someone, without feeling like, oh, I don't want to get into a debate. Be like, actually, we can have a respect. I saw respect was a good value. We can have respectful and curious conversations, and you don't have to be a climate scientist. So we kind of hope by empowering people to feel they can speak from your own lived experience. You don't have to know every single fact. Some deniers, which are a very small portion of the population, they're very loud, but they're actually a very small portion of the population. I've totally forgotten my line of thought. I'll stop.
So they went down very shortly before Christmas 2019, and I did some work, drawings and paintings before they went underwater. This little oil painting here is of Jason's daughter several years ago, modelled for here, and our two models here are in the underwater greenhouse, and I called it the potting bench, I think, this one, because they're sort of colluding here, and there are pots. There's a nice little story about this one too. If you ever get down the chance to dive down there, there's a little resident octopus, and you very rarely see him, but you will see the shells, the evidence of where he eats. He leaves his shells on the potting bench there, so that's really nice. So that's an example of something making a home there. And this one, I just called it the Pora. She was again following the theme of the greenhouse. She's using a watering can. So these are both works in pastel, and this little one is an oil painting. So they're just fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So these are the original maquettes that formed part of the planning around the Museum of Underwater Art. Tell us about what's the purpose of a maquette? How does that actually work? You know, tell us about where did we arrive at this sort of principle of the Museum of Underwater Art for Townsville? Tell us about these little people and forms.
So yeah, normally when we start some of the large-scale works, we do testing at the beginning to make sure we've got all the forms and the textures and the characteristics of the models that we're trying to create. So each one of these is obviously a different personality, either a marine biologist or an activist. And so we wanted to capture some of their research or the theme that they're interested in and try to embed that into the sculpture. So these were the initial maquettes, and they were done with a mixture of sort of hand techniques, modelling them in clay, but also using 3D scanners to scan clams and to scan different types of coral, and then sort of morph the two pieces together. From these small maquettes, they were then 3D enlarged to their monumental scale. And those, using a robot, were then milled out of a singular block of material, and then from that block we then sculpted on top and made silicon molds. Those molds were then cast and they were put in the container and shipped to Townsville. Their foundations were made, and then they had to, each one I think was around 12 tons I think, and those all had to be transported from Townsville out to John Brewer Reef. So there was quite a lot of logistics in working out how we're going to transport that, how we're going to safely rest it on the sea floor. And so now it's quite an exciting part for me. This is the first time that I get to go and see them after 4 years. Since then, a lot of coral has been planted on them and also has grown naturally on them. So it's super exciting to see, you know, what they're all going to look like tomorrow.